We are so back. We finally entered Attack on Titan Season 3, and let me tell you something, dear viewer, we are in for a treat. With Red Swan and Shuketa Shikabana and Omich back to back, it's enough to make a grown man cry. I'm not talking about the beauty of the song. This is real MF territory. Forget Midzo Wasasagio, Garno Yukia, because today we are finally breaking down the underappreciated beauty of... Immediately, we are hit with a swift change in art style. Up to this point, the prior three openings have been pretty consistent with the art style and animation quality of the series, with the only noticeable exception being the slight difference in art style presented incredibly briefly in opening 2. But here, it's a completely different ballpark, and helps to really emphasize the beauty of simply being alive, a theme filled intensely with Historia's character during the royal government arc, which is just as underrated as this very opening. The thematic elements of this arc are represented perfectly throughout this opening, as we see each of the central characters from this arc reflect on their childhoods as Eren swings through the ruins of Shiganshina with his ODM gear before meeting both Mikasa and Armin, waiting for Eren on the rooftops, with the imagery of Eren being the embodiment of freedom subtly hidden in plain sight, as the wings of freedom on his uniform overlook the sun absolutely glistening on the horizon, pointing towards a very bright future by the looks of it for our main trio. It's ironic. As Eren runs to greet Mikasa and Armin, we momentarily flash back to before the fall of Walmaria, as the trio climb to the rooftops of Shiganshina as children. Bit of an odd place for 10-year-olds to play, but its reminder of how far we've come evokes a strong sense of nostalgia as the trio meet again as teenagers in seemingly the exact same spot, with the use of warmer colors throughout the opening also aiding the sense of nostalgia. The trio look onwards darkly at their linked horizon, representing their futures, as the camera begins to pan upwards into the heavens above in combination with a very smooth title drop, now updated with the addition of the Season 3 subtitle. In fact, the camera pans so high above that we are greeted by the vastness of space, or possibly an unknown glimpse at the paths, which in the context of this opening links the upbringings of the cast together, as well as the trio looking towards their futures on the horizon. The visuals of space may also be a representation of the limitless possibilities that await our valiant scouts, which is very ironic given the fixed timeline, as well as the paths to the final frontier that awaits the scout regiment beneath the ruins of Shiganshina. The title is engulfed by a very similar light to the paths, with the same light growing dimmer as the shadows of the EMA trio overlook the scene. Who walk into frame than the empty yet vibrant streets of Shiganshina, with a childlike whimsy and innocence still very much being alive, judging by their body language. However, not every childhood is a happy one, which is painfully reminded by Levi as an adult revisiting the slums of the underground city beneath Mitras, with Levi turning and giving the camera a sour expression, arguably more grouchy than normal, signifying the unpleasant memories associated with growing up in extreme poverty. The focus on Levi is particularly important, as this arc would flesh out more of his backstory that we were only very briefly given in the No Regrets OVAs and light novel, as well as the reveal that he's an Ackerman at the end of the arc. The childlike wonder of this opening is briefly restored as the still of the main trio as children tilts in the frame, which fades into the main trio walking in the present day. It's important to note that as children, both Mikasa and Armin's gaze is fixed on Eren, whereas in the present, they're both turned away from Eren, with his own side being centered straight ahead, rather than on Armin. A really subtle but brilliant way of portraying how as teenagers, the main trio have more pressing matters in their lives, like being wary of titans, rather than being able to run through the streets all day as how they did as children, which is perfectly emphasized by their lack of expressions as teenagers, as well as the use of a less saturated color palette. The lack of eyes on Eren could also represent the disconnect between the trio, which would begin in this very arc, with Eren and Historia getting kidnapped by the royal government. As the trio moves forward, we flash back to Kid Levi in the underground city, looking upwards directly into the camera, with an understandable look of discontent given his circumstances. The fact he's looking upwards with a dejected expression indicates his longing to be above ground instead of being faced with the bleak underground city ceiling that confines his inhabitants to the crime-ridden streets. Levi then pushes forward, slicking back his hair with an even more concerned expression, which is met by Kenny's boot with a shot of presumably whiskey, as the camera pulls back to reveal the full scene of Kenny resting in a bar surrounded by a number of empty bottles, most likely as a way to cope with his line of work, which is super depressing, especially given the fact his drink is highlighted twice by the lighting, giving the impression that he's using alcohol as a crutch, but acts as a reminder for the cruelty of the underground city life. The fact this scene is followed by Levi pulling a knife on the camera and Kenny specifically dozing off in a bar could also represent their bloody reunion in episode 39, but it's most likely just a way for the opening to quickly establish a relation with one another. The way Kenny flicks his hat up after Levi's knife skills is also very reminiscent of how he left Levi to fend for himself after watching him take down a grown-ass man despite his short stature in episode 47. His sneering at the camera towards the end of the shot could also represent his discomfort with playing the role as Levi's mentor and father figure, which which wouldn't be too out of character. The themes of fatherhood continue as Irvin literally looks back on his childhood with a determined expression reflected in the window pane of the classroom, a fitting environment given his father's job as a history teacher. This scene could even be a representation of Erwin's father teaching him the true history of Eldia, but is most likely just some father and son bonding. The determined expression of adult Irvin represents his will to uphold his father's legacy by reaching the basement and verifying for himself whether his death was in vain or not. In contrast, Historia sits on the Rice family ranch with Frida, blowing a handful of pollen from her hand, transitioning into this incredibly vibrant and beautifully drawn frame. This opening is just so peak. The fact this scene is set at dusk symbolizes the short time Frida has left with Historia before having to forcefully pass on the power of the Founding Titan, as well as being a general metaphor for the 13-year curse considerably shortening her lifespan. The heavy use of blue in its freeze frame also supports the peacefulness of this precious block memory for Historia, as the color blue is used to commonly symbolize tranquility as well as peace and calmness. As up to this point in her life, Historia has only known of the comfort and safety from both society within and beyond the walls that her family's ranch provides. We seamlessly continue with a montage of the main trio and Aaron's hand reaching forward, desperately trying to grab hold of the direction his life is heading in, before slicing his palm and gripping the open wound. The background being the sky is once again a reminder of Aaron's obsession with the concept of freedom, although interestingly, both Mikasa and Armin look away from his squirming hand, a possible nod towards Aaron hiding his eternal battles from his friends, which is also supported by Aaron staring directly at his trembling hand. Also important to note how the lyrics during this section are "What's the lie? What's the truth? What to believe in my life?" An obvious nod towards the stolen memories of Historia and the rest of parody through the power of the Founding Titan, but could also be a representation of the general public's opinion on the aftermath of the royal government arc. Aaron gripping his bleeding palm represents how he feels that the Rice family's blood is on his hands due to him inheriting Grish's attack titan. Unbeknownst to Aaron, he would be right. The drops of blood cause a ripple in the opening as Aaron reflects on his life with a flashback to him being held as a baby by Carla and Grisha in another beautifully drawn still, with a high saturation being an excellent way of expressing how Aaron looks back on his childhood with rose-tinted glasses, where he could live blissfully unaware of the harsh reality that lies outside the confines of the Shiganshina district. Again, the camera panning up to a vibrant still of Aaron's childhood home acts as a metaphor for his fond memories of before the fall of Walmaria, with the sun shining on the house, symbolizing how Aaron regards his family home as a safe space, with a white flash bringing us back to the harsh present day, as he rises into a stiff, motionless stance, almost like a statue, as his younger self accidentally runs into him, yet despite almost being knocked down, present-day Aaron's body remains in the same upright position, facing onwards at the horizon, as his younger self looks on in awe, but doesn't get a response from his future self, representing how Aaron has been grounded down over time by the constant attacks on Titans.
Say that again?
The unnatural speed in which the way the clouds move in the background also supports the idea of how the passage of time is a cruel and unforgiving mistress, which is also reflected in the lyrics, like a fallen angel, driven by the winds of time. Obviously, the winds of time represent the passage of time, but like a fallen angel could foreshadow Aaron's descent into madness, as the term fallen angel is often used to describe Satan from the Bible. And given how in seasons 1 to 3, Aaron is propped up as almost like a messiah figure, applying the term fallen angel is very fitting given what he will later do at the end of the series. The lyric like a fallen angel may also be slight foreshadowing towards the term devil as a parody, given that we would learn the true history of Eldia by the end of the season, but that might be stretching on my part. This scene is also another display of how Aaron's character is closely interlinked with the concept of freedom, almost like a bird in the sky. As Kid Aaron runs out of frame, he reunites with Armin and Mikasa running through the streets of Shiganshina, as well as through similar scenery to the previous section of the opening, with the sparkles in their footsteps, as well as the sunlight hitting the camera, causing a rainbow to appear from the lens flare, showcasing how during this period of their lives, the EMA trio were carefree and happy, with teenage Aaron returning to create a strong contrast as he looks on at the younger trio running off at dusk, symbolizing the end of this joyous period in time for the trio as he tenses up with the resolve to keep moving forward. This beautiful opening comes to a close with various flashbacks to the main cast as children, such as the Marlene warriors traveling through the wilderness of Paradis at night, Historia presumably waiting for Frida on the ranch, the young EMA trio running ahead with Mikasa's sandal slipping off her foot, Erwin and Levi crossing paths, highlighting the difference in their upbringings, as well as the class disparity within the walls, as Erwin dresses clean and smartly, while Levi is covered in dirt and wearing unkempt clothing, as those who live in the underground city have very little to their name, especially compared to the wealthy in Walsina. The montage comes to an end as Mika's sandal finally hits the cobbled street, possibly representation for the mad dash to safety after Walmart is breached in episode 1, as the time of day in both scenes is at dusk, as well as the common trope of losing precious items at a time of crisis. And for Mikasa, that will be losing her family again for the second time. And finally, the opening comes to a proper close as the basement key appears to remind both the audience as well as Eren of his ultimate goal of reaching the basement to uncover the truth of the Titans. Linking back to the lyrics, what's the lie, what's the truth, what to believe. The addition of a barely visible rainbow in this scene symbolizes hope, a feeling that will very much carry the scouts throughout the upcoming Return to Shiganshina arc. And now we close out Red Swan for real this time with an incredibly vibrant still of the main trio as kids, showing their lost joy and whimsy one last time. Overall, I would personally consider Red Swan to easily be the most underrated Attack on Titan opening by a mile, as most people in the fandom disregard this opening for not feeling like Attack on Titan, which while I can definitely see the point of view they're coming from, how could you hate this opening? From the absolutely beautiful song performed by Yoshiki to the incredibly vibrant visuals, everything is just so peak. This is also the first Attack on Titan opening not to be performed by Linked Horizon, and what a knockout of the park for Yoshiki it was. Truly an all-timer. Again, the most common argument used against this opening is that it doesn't feel like Attack on Titan, though personally, I disagree. This opening is about reflecting on the past, which is represented with vibrant colors and bloom. As often when we look back in our own lives, we view the past through rose-tinted glasses, which is what Eren is doing in this very opening. Not to mention how the opening further accentuates the story and Frida's bond, as well as the subtle world building by contrasting Irvin and Levi's childhoods, by exposing the large gap between social classes even inside the walls. Even the montage towards the end of the opening links back to the main idea of comparing and contrasting childhoods as we get our third ever glimpse at the secret suffering of the Morlin warriors, easily making Red Swan a top tier AOT opening and one of the best anime openings of all time in general. But now to cover the greatest Attack on Titan opening.